Tales of the Shadow Empire, whispers in the lunar fire, skies alive with unseen veins. The moon is just a stage. Truth is woven into dreams. Truth is woven into deep, deep dreams.
Let's start with the beginning. Jerome Powell is the first Gentile to run the Federal Reserve. I didn't put a comma on that, or an ellipsis, or or add an endless series of positives like I'm like I used to. I normally do. Nope. Period. First Gentile to run the Federal Reserve. Moreover, 8th generation American. He traces his family line back to Virginia and the founding of the Virginia colonies. Okay? So Powell fundamentally has built a different stuff than every other Fed chairman previous to this. Just to throw it out there. Now let's take it one step further. Now, what is Davos's plan? What is the City of London's plan? Total surveillance, total tax collection and surveillance, programmable money, 15-minute cities, suicide pods, kill all the useless eaters, and those you can't kill fast enough, give them video games and drugs until they kill themselves. So they believe, that's what they believe. They honestly believe that their system only really works for maybe 1 or 2 billion people. I think they really believe that. And they're also trying to demoralize and dispirit us to the point where we just give up and give in to them as though they're terrible, almost satanic demands, right? That's what they want on one side. Now, how do they get there? Well, they get there through the destruction, as they've talked about, the destruction of commercial banking. Okay, because in a world dominated by a central bank or a consortium of central banks that directly issue currency, the two-channel monetary system where you have the central bank delivers the money to the commercial banks then lend it to you, and the commercial banks make the VIG in the middle, right? We don't need that with a central bank digital currency. A retail central bank digital currency, not a wholesale. That's a completely different discussion. That's just payment layers, and it's not really all that interesting. And don't conflate the two. FedNow is not a digital dollar, for example. It's just a payment rail. It's no different than Strike on top of Bitcoin, or the Lightning Network on top of Bitcoin. It's the same thing. It's a payment layer. And that's actually where the commercial banks want to control, and they want to have their place in, because that's where they make their money. It's a great place for them to make money. You do away with commercial banking in that scenario where I can just go to the Fed and I can just go to the ECB and say, look, I want to borrow money and buy a house.
Just to jump in, just one second, Tom. Just to jump in, because I think people hear commercial banks and they think like like mom and pop or like smaller banks. Commercial banks go all the way up to JP Morgan.
Everything from the local credit union all the way up to JP Morgan. Right. That's commercial banking.
Because I think people sleep on that. That's a really important thing.
It's really important. There's community banks, there's state banks, there's regional banks, there's international banks, there's all sorts of banks, and it's a system that is rotten to the core, and it needs to be reformed. Okay. Now, when I started thinking along these lines, when I finally started putting this stuff together back in 2021, I said, something's not sitting here, right? Something's not right about this. I'm against this whole Davos thing. This is obviously nonsense. Why would the commercial banks go along with this? Because they're not needed. And of course, the answer is they wouldn't, right? Why would they? Because there's no place for them in that. Even if in a transitional period, they can make some money on the process in the short term, they understand that that's a 10-year time horizon. And then they got to what? Go out and dig ditches for a living. Really? You're selling that to Wall Street? Like, learn to code. Yeah, you're telling Wall Street to learn to code in 10 years.
Hey, maybe Jamie Dimon will just get a job in the Harris campaign, in the Harris government.
Or maybe Jamie Dimon will take a job slinging fries over McDonald's.
Tom, sorry, just to put a pin in this, because I
Sure.
like to take shots at certain people who've added me online. Someone sent me that kind of thing, like, oh, Jamie Dimon's said that he'd be open to working with the Harris campaign. I'm like, really? Okay, so riddle me this. Jamie Dimon, the man who's put every single dollar he has into J.P. Morgan Chase, who is one of the most, who can move entire world markets with a stick-it note, is going to go work for who? The most retarded campaign / administration to ever retard. Are you out of your freaking mind?
No, it was especially when Dimon said at the beginning of the year, oh, by the way, Wall Street, it's okay to vote for a Republican. He backed Nikki Haley early in the primary season, and then later, said, hey, and then went to Davos right after that and said, oh, by the way, get used to 7% interest rates and drill, baby, drill. And then after that said, Donald Trump really isn't wrong about a lot of these things. And then later said, hey, Trump actually is probably the best candidate for the job at this point. And then a month before the election says, I'm voting for Donald Trump. And
right. But totally going to work. But totally going to work for Harris. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, more
very
open.
More,
and then the other day when Trump came out and said, and officially on his Truth Social account said, I want to thank Jamie Dimon for all the work, but he's not being invited into the administration. I'm like, that's exactly, take it on face value. Dimon is about to retire from J.P. Morgan. Right. He has a succession plan in place. We can get into that later if you want. In broad strokes, Davos's plan is to do away with the need for commercial banking, which is another way of saying they want state formation of all capital, or the public production of capital. It doesn't come out of the commercial banking system where we have rational or semi-rational pricing of risk and all of that through the interest rate mechanisms and the free market, things like the free markets and the repo markets and things like that. Just no, we don't get any of that. We don't. No. We can just decide on that because you have a social credit score and a body mass index that says that you're not allowed to have a mortgage. You said mean things about Ursula von der Leyen on Twitter. Sorry, you get to be homeless. What? Why would you be mad about that? You are a bad person and you need to be unpersoned. And you need to go to room 101. And I'm sorry, I know this is the face, this is their thinking, right? So now it's dumb, it's silly, it's infantile, but it's real. So now on the other side of this, so I say to myself, okay, so there's your plan. Jamie Dimon sits down with John Solomon. I've got one of these in my hand. Now, I know Dimon doesn't smoke anymore because he had that aortic section, but just imagine this. This is a double whiskey. This is a far better cigar than what I'm smoking currently. And we're all sitting around like, so this Klaus Schwab guy, like, what are these City of London guys? What are they thinking? Like that we're going to roll over and play dead. Like, imagine these guys now, take them out of their high collared shirts and the blue striped shirts, and put them in silk black suits with silk ties and perfectly tailored outfits and slicked back hair, and put vowels on the end of their names, like mine. And it's envelope day. Okay? That's the world we live in. And those guys said, you know what? No. Not tough. They're not going to be down with that. So now, how would they possibly say no to this vast, ancient architecture? Well, when you drill down into U.S. monetary policy, and everybody looks at the Federal Reserve and they say, the Fed's incompetent. They don't get anything right. They always cut interest rate. They always start cutting too early during the cycle. Like I'm an Austrian and a libertarian, And, I'm like, yeah, the history here is that every time the Fed tries to raise rates, then things start to break. So then they lower interest rates quickly and they go back and they go down, and then we continue down the 5,000-year spiral down to 0% interest rates like we got under Bernanke and Yellen. Why did that happen? Well, now let's look at elementally and mechanistically what's going on with the US dollar system. Okay. Once you understand that the US dollar is not, everybody says, well, is the dollar going to end being the world's reserve currency? I'm like, okay, you've now admitted that the dollar is a global phenomenon. So now, when you do your analysis of the Federal Reserve, why do you only look at domestic markets? Why do you think that Jerome Powell and or Janet Yellen or Ben Bernanke or even Alan Greenspan only look at the domestic economy as to what they were going to do with monetary policy? Why would you think that? Now let's take a step back. If you can think through that one, then you can say, who are these people? Who do they actually work for? What's their ideological position? What's their ideological bent? What's their training? What's their imprinting? Who are they? What do they want? You come to find out very quickly that Janet Yellen's a labor economist. That's another way of saying fucking communist. Bernanke's no better. He idolizes, Friedman and Anna Schwartz's analysis of the Great Depression, which is wrong, and he's fully aware of the Rothbardian and Misesian and Hayekian critique of Benjamin Strong and the Federal Reserve during the 1920s. Don't let anybody ever tell you that Bernanke doesn't know about that. He chose poorly. Why? I'm not going to go there. Just know, if you have globalists at the Fed, why would you be surprised to get globalist policy out of the Fed? What would globalist policy look like? Well, it would look like a Fed constantly accommodating, sending more dollars overseas, and strip mining the flow of dollars domestically by allowing Congress to profligate spend at a deficit, subsidize that, send the dollars out. Now, the first part of that was the Marshall Plan, to rebuild Europe and to extend the American empire, or to build the American empire. Fine. Yes, put your scare quotes around American empire. I firmly believe there's an American part of the American quotient is pretty large in the American empire. I also happen to think that the British quotient part of the American empire is also pretty large. And I also think that there's an Israeli or Zionist or Jewish component to this as well.
What I've said, just for people who've been following on or are new to this, is that if the American empire is actually the American empire, then you have to ask the question is like, well, why is the American empire doing things or acting in a way that isn't like an empire? So if you look at, let's say, environmental policies, it makes sense if you're an empire to make other people do that. You'd make other people get screwed and have a lower output or control their output. You would never do it to yourself. Like the Roman Empire would never have gone to Germany and said, you know what, we're both going to just shoot ourselves in the dick. How about that? Right?
Like, how about we do that? Like,
yeah,
here's my gun. Boom.
Yeah, because we're such good friends. We have such a unique friendship that we would hate to just make you get screwed. We're going to screw it. We're going to screw ourselves too, because that's what empires do.
That's not what they do. If you look at it's part of this whole. It's part of this first order kind of normalcy bias to never ascribe to malice that which incompetence covers equally well. Bullshit. How about they're vandals and they're LARPing as being incompetent? Prove to me that I'm wrong about that statement. That framework fits the data a load better than the other one. Now drill in. What happens when Trump is elected? Trump is elected 5 months after Brexit. Right? So Brexit, earthquake. City of London did not get what they wanted. Brussels did not get what they wanted. Then Trump wins. They bind down Trump, and they spend all their time binding down Trump with all of this bullshit that they miss the important part of the story, because they can't control this part of the story. Because in this respect, for the first time ever, the Fed's quote unquote independence from government is an asset rather than a liability. Why? Because Trump, who doesn't know anything, takes it on. I mean, this guy took, just to make sure we understand what we're dealing with in 2017 Trump. He walks into the White House not expecting to win. He's not prepared. He's taking the advice of everybody around him. Eventually, this guy gets told, you should hire John Bolton. Trump told the story on Joe Rogan. They're like, I wish you had called me 3 days earlier. I would have not hired this guy Bolton. I just hired him. Now I'm screwed. I didn't know. That's how unprepared he was in 2016. So when he takes office in 2017, Steve Mnuchin and the guys around him all say, this guy Jerome Powell is the good guy. The Fed's a mess, but Powell's a good guy, and you should put him in charge. Trump says, cool. Puts him in. He gets. No one is ever in the Congress and Senate. No one's worried about Powell. Powell's been ineffectual at the Fed. He's been a nobody at the Fed for all these years. We only find out that Powell was the only real hawk on the FOMC from Daniel DiMartino Booth's book, Fed Up. By the way. Okay, so now no one knows what's going on here. The senators don't know. Nobody knows. And it didn't come down from on high that his nomination should be blocked. So he sails through the confirmation process. And then almost immediately, what does he do? Then they say, we should move John Williams from the Atlanta Fed to the New York Fed. And if you go back and you read the Financial Times and the Guardian and the Atlantic and the New York Times and the WAPO and the Wall Street Journal, and I didn't pronounce that wrong, John Williams was unqualified to run the New York Fed. They understood what was happening. Why? Because John Williams, while he was at the Atlanta Fed, was also the architect of SOFR, the Secured Overnight Financing Rate, or SOFR. Now let's back up one step further. Paul Volcker makes the world safe to send dollars around the world in the late 1970s, early 1980s by establishing the dollar reserve standard as a going concern, as opposed to the 10 years previous to that where it was announced, but then it took 10 years to make that stick. The recession under the Reagan administration that Volcker created ends in around 1983. By that point, LIBOR, the London Interbank Offer Rate, becomes the debt indexing rate of the world, basically, for global dollars in 1984 by agreement. And then 1985, we get the G7, G8, whatever it is. The G5 does the Plaza Accord to, basically fix currency rates. Bing, it's all there. That's the dollar reserve standard. That goes until 2008 when the Lehman Brothers fails, takes down the whole banking system, takes down the banking system and everything else. And then we get coordinated central bank policy in 2011 through 2021, and I'll get to that in a minute. So when Lehman Brothers fails, Powell's at the Fed going, they're asking Bernanke, why all of a sudden do we have a 2% inflation target? Why this policy? Why this policy? Why that policy? All that stuff came out of whole cloth. Bernanke just made that shit up. But while LIBOR was the law of the land, effectively, all debt instruments denominated in US dollars around the entire fucking world were indexed to LIBOR. So LIBOR sets a rate in the afternoon, 5 o'clock London time every day. Done. That's the price of dollars. You write a car loan at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in New York. After that, that's the rate you're going to get quoted. You're going to get LIBOR plus blah for your car loan.
Okay, so that pricing, that LIBOR rate, is partly based on which conditions? On both the interest rate that the Fed is setting, yes, And
and the market demand for dollars as it is perceived by 18 City of London banks, 17
bingo.
of which work out of London, one of which is JP Morgan's London office.
So the incentive here is to make American dollars as attractive as humanly freaking possible. Yeah.
Yes and no. Well, it is. It's to create an incentive process. What it means is that it's as attractive as possible for foreign users of dollars.
Yes.
Not domestic users of dollars. So here's the gig. Globalization was built on the back of dollars going out from Washington, been out by foreign central banks and the shadow banking system, and then being deposited into private bank accounts, which then create a whole bunch of, which then they can lend out themselves. I can lend money to you, Jason, right? And that's a shadow bank transaction. The banks aren't regulated by it. The banking regulations, it's just a private transaction between two people, right? So, bank balance sheet don't come into it. Banking regulations don't govern that. I have a right to lend my money to you at an agreed upon interest rate. We write a contract and that's it. It's probably called private contract law. The whole world is based on this. Nothing wrong with that. What I'm saying is the size and scope of those dollars, of those quote unquote euro dollars, which are offshore dollars being held in bank accounts and then being used as a lending pump, they are a source of liquidity and leverage within the offshore dollar system or the global dollar system that the Fed's not in control of. Why? Jeff Snyder was right for years when he kept saying the Fed's not in control of its own monetary policy. The euro dollar system will always tell the Fed what to do. Jeff was correct up until the day the United States got off of LIBOR. Because now let's talk about relative strength of economies, relative strength of banking systems, relative comparative advantage, and everything else. No one is going to argue that certainly through the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s, 2010s, the United States economy was more vibrant, more dynamic, deeper, richer, more liquid than any other economy in the world. We can argue that point today about China. I'm not here to have that argument. I'm telling you that was the way this was built. So when you look at the price of money and as it flows through an economy, you understand that the United States demand for money and demand for dollars is far higher than it is for everywhere else. Meaning, in order to keep the economy in balance, if we're using these post-Keynesian style economic arguments, and we're doing the Fed as a Keynesian institution, and they're trying to keep demand from getting out of control by overheating the economy with too much credit, then the Fed just manages the amount of credit that's in the system. That's all they can really do, right? And by doing that, they can control the amount of leverage that's within the system. And what that winds up doing is that winds up translating down to a rate of interest for the money, okay? And if it's above a certain rate, they call it the neutral rate. And then above the neutral rate, it's accommodative. And below the neutral rate, it's restrictive, okay? And so you're either going to step on the gas and allow the economy to run hotter, or you're going to pull it back. Now, this is all technocratic and tyrannical and ridiculous, but I'm not here to have that conversation today. I'm here to have the conversation about the nuts and bolts of how this shit fucking works in the real goddamn world, period. Now, understanding that, I just made the argument effectively that the United States economy is capable of handling a higher interest rate than the rest of the world that uses the dollars that it prints and sends out around the world, and they lever up. Why? Our economy is better than theirs. So if we're all borrowing at the same rate, they're going to expand faster and not have a pool of real savings underneath it to support that expansion of their local monetary supply as expressed in their dollar liabilities versus the United States. What does that mean? That means that when the Fed decides the U.S. economy is overheating and they need to cut back on interest rates, then say the rate is 5%. The Fed raises to 6. Then they raise to 6.5. And then we start to see wobbles in, I don't know, pick a country, India, Hong Kong, wherever, Bangladesh, wherever, it doesn't matter. And then it starts to get closer and closer to home. It starts in the emerging markets, Thailand, famously, right? Russia, famously. And then it starts to get closer to home. Home would, in this case, is London, not New York. Everything is still fine in the United States. Okay, my credit cards went up a couple of percent. My adjustable rate mortgage went up, went up 1.5 points. I can live with that. My job is good. My disposable monthly income can absorb that. I can cut back on spending a little bit. It's not a big deal. Whereas for City of London, who's heavily over-levered, or Brussels, or Frankfurt, or anybody else, or Italy, they're screwed. The Spanish banks, the Greek banks, the Italian banks, they can't. They don't have 1.5 points worth of wiggle room there. They've got 75 basis points instead. And so the Fed raises by 1.5 points, they should go to 2, or maybe even just hold that 1.5 points raise for, 18 months. And within 6 months, the other side is screaming. What happens then? LIBOR starts to blow out to the upside. LIBOR will rise faster at some point than the Federal Reserve, than the Fed funds rate. It starts to creep up. And because everything's indexed to LIBOR and not the Fed funds rate, Bob's your uncle. Now all of a sudden, my credit card went up by 2.5%. Not 1.5 points, 2.5. Now all of a sudden, I can't afford the GI Joe with the Kung Fu grip for Christmas for my kid. I can't. My factory just laid off 50 people, blah, 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 blah. And we start getting a layoff. We start getting a recession cycle faster in the United States because London is and the Eurodollar markets are contracting credit in the United States. But LIBOR was the fulcrum on which this depended.
How many points did Powell raise it by and keep it?
We're getting there now.
Okay,
that's the layout. Now in 2017, they start moving the United States away from LIBOR towards SOFR. But it's a 5-year rollout. Slowly but surely, SOFR is introduced into the monetary system. So by January 1st, 2022, SOFR, all new debt contracts in the United States are indexed to SOFR. What is SOFR? SOFR is a market rate, not a rate determined by 18 City of London banks who get together on the phone and say, yeah, the rate for dollars today is blah. Yep, what are you saying? I'm seeing 5.55557. I'm seeing 5.568. We'll call it 5.562. We're good. They end the call. They print the thing. They're out the door. That's what they did every day. Now, SOFR was designed, and SOFR, by the way, was a mote in the eye of John Williams and Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve since before Obama became president. The United States has wanted SOFR for an awfully long time. Powell starts the process. SOFR is a market rate based on real transactions in the U.S. domestic repo and money markets, and it's a measured rate. It transacts. We see what people transact and what the demand for money is. It's decoupled the American economy from the demand for offshore dollars. Now offshore dollars are not the tail wagging the dog. Now the American economy is telling the dog is barking at offshore, going, sorry, this is the cost. January 1st, 2022, all new debt contracts in the United States are indexed to SOFR. As of September 30th of this year, LIBOR is gone. And now everything is indexed to SOFR. So now everything is indexed to the United States. This happened under Trump. Why did it happen under Trump? Like I said earlier, because Trump didn't know. Now, at the same time, Trump was probably okay with it once he understood the implications of it, because Donald Trump understands these things. He also is a bit of a mercantilist, and there's a variety of other defects that he has. But this matters, because once you understand that, and I understood this when Powell started to raise rates. And I went, Powell's going to 6. You watch. If I were Powell, I'd go to 6. Let's find out. Well, I'm going to keep raising rates hard until the world starts to scream, until the American banks start to scream. Fuck Europe. Fuck Hong Kong. Fuck Thailand. Fuck India. Fuck Brussels. Fuck them all. Janie, you good? John Solomon over at Goldman. You good? Bank balance sheets are good. Credit markets are flowing. The federal Fed funds rate as of today is really just a managed range between interest on reserve balances and the OIS swap spread. I think that's what and FRB.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Goldman Sachs is also part of this as well, right? Like,
I think the consortium is Morgan, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, Wells to a lesser extent, and I'm not sure about. I mean, these are the big ones, right? And there's probably others, but on the other side of the other side of the ledger, Bank of New York Mellon, BOFA, Bank of America.
Mellon keeps coming back.
Mellon's the big one. Mellon, Bank of New York Mellon, and Citigroup, and I think it's mostly BOFA and Citigroup because they bet badly, and their balance sheets are just so fucking impaired. Okay, so now, with those things said, Powell raises rates aggressively. Everybody screams from Peter Schiff on down. I mean, everybody. All of a sudden, I was out there by myself saying, Powell's going to go to 5.5%, 6%. Everybody thought I was crazy. I was a nobody. Doesn't matter. It's fine. People who are much more prominent at the time than I was kept saying, no, it does the 1%, he's going to blow out the budget, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, those things happened eventually. And they also happened because Janet Yellen biased new Treasury issuance under the Biden administration in order to make that look as bad as possible, in order to seed the zeitgeist and seed what I like to call the zero hedge set into conniptions. And zero hedge loves to write, clickbait. I love zero hedge, but I know what their business model is, and their business model is to sell advertising. No blame, no shame. It is what it is.
And to give people a little bit of a break on this one, because I've experienced this multiple times, everything from COVID to Ukraine war to everything else, is I will say something very calmly. This happened in my own house. I'll say something very calmly and very assuredly about, look, I'm looking at this data set. I understand you're getting your information from your reality has been shaped by everything, by this standard reality. There's no reason to question it because it's always been bearing out as more or less true. You've been able to operate your entire life this way, and that's fine. Right. I'm looking you in the eye very calmly telling you that everything you think is real is absolute bullshit. And not just, where you got this one a little bit wrong here and there. I'm like, no. The whole damn thing is absolute total bullshit. So one of the things we've also been exploring is this whole bond market, right? And that the bond market, worth like what? A few quadrillion
an
dollars.
Order of magnitude more than the equity markets. Let's just make it easy.
We'll just say infinity money, right? Number too big, don't worry about it.
Right.
That is the suicide pact. That is the ticking time bomb suicide pact that all this relies on. This is why, in many cases, why are they doing all this? Is it just for money? Is it just because they're just plain evil? Because evil just likes to be evil. This is Cobra versus G.I. Joe, right? So
SOFR breaks the relationship where LIBOR can dictate monetary policy and force the Fed to cut rates before it's done wringing out the excess inflation in the economy. Okay, this is a very important point. The U.S., for the first time in its 250-year history, is in charge of its own monetary policy. You understand? It's never been in charge of its own monetary policy because before the Federal Reserve, the British and the French effectively controlled our monetary policy because they controlled our trade.
Sounds like an empire to me. I know the empires of the past have always outsourced their entire monetary policy.
But in the 19th century, we weren't an empire. We were a fledgling nation. Okay. By the time we get to post 1945, now we're subsumed by the siren's call of empire because we now have the ability to print money and do things with it. And everybody wants that ability. Now, the funny part about it is how we wound up with British foreign policy, British domestic policy, and British regulatory policy, and British this, and British this, and British that. I'm trying to figure this out. We wound up with, we hate Russia, we're friends with Israel, we have the central bank has taken over the economy, and we're trying to make the world safe for climate change. Why they had to steal the 2020 election? They had to steal the 2020 election to try and derail Powell and to try and regain monetary control over the United States. That's why we got COVID. It's why the bond market went bidless in May of 2020. It's why they ran a $2 trillion deficit, okay? Because they needed to keep sending dollars out, and they needed to, and then they wanted to ensure that Jerome Powell didn't get a second term. Now, many people have tried to like play the gotcha game with me on Twitter, like, well, then if you're right about this, why did Biden renominate Powell for a second term? I'm like, because he had no other moves. But like, you're walking into the middle of the conversation, and that's fine, and I appreciate that. Here's the thing: he had no other choice. Biden didn't. He tried for 6 months to block Powell's reconfirmation until he ran out of room. He ran out of room when, after Powell's term ended, the FOMC voted Powell chair until reconfirmation, meaning at that point, he's going to be in charge of monetary policy until the Senate either votes him up or down. So Biden, at that point in February 2022, right about the same time that the war in Ukraine and in Russia was bubbling up to the surface, you can see it all comes together in a 6-week period. Powell gets reconfirmed by the Senate. The Russia-Ukraine war starts. The sanctions go on. Powell starts raising interest rates. This is the war. Powell says, quite simply, if you are going to fight World War III to take out Russia, you're going to do so at 6%. And you got the blessing of the goddamn commercial banks on Wall Street to do so, because they were staring at the existential threat of the WEF and City of London and central bank digital currencies and the end of Wall Street and the restoration of the old colonial powers of Europe, and this time in a techno-feudal system that makes the Middle Ages look like an Amish barn raising. That was the plan, and anybody who thought Jamie Dimon was going along with that for an extra $50 million, you can literally go fuck yourself, because that is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. And I saw young Einstein in the theaters. Like,
he paid good money for that, folks. Yeah.
So what's important here is that once you get that, everything else is that you've seen over the last 3 years, literally downstream of Jerome Powell in June of 2021 started draining the world of Eurodollars by raising the reverse repo rate 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate and creating in an environment where no one wanted to lend. He told the banks, hey man, you get an extra 5 basis points over here, and that's all it took. Because capital flows to where it's going to be treated best. And at that point in time, 5 basis points was like manna from heaven. And that's why they took it. It's also why 25 basis points built the system to that moment, because that's what Ben Bernanke was paying the banks not to lend all of the reserves he printed after Lehman Brothers. Interest on excess reserve, which is now known as interest on reserve balances. But during the 2010s, this will be hilarious. Gary North banging his shoe on the table like Khrushchev is an image that everybody should get blazoned into their brains, that old Calvinist. But love that man. And I wish he was alive today, because I wish he was alive to watch what's happening today, because he would get it, right? And he said, Bernanke's printing all this money, but he's not going to let it circulate. He's sterilizing it all. He's just giving it to the banks as reserves. It's not going to circulate because the banks don't have any projects to lend against where they can make better. They can make 0.5%. So 0.25% is the winner. And that money just sat there, earning 0.25%, slowly but surely recapitalizing the banks through the laundering, basically, of taxpayer money through the Federal Reserve to the banks at 25 basis points at a time, quarter over quarter over quarter over quarter for 10 years.
And this is all to keep the bond market solvent.
It was also to turbocharge the leverage within the offshore dollar system and to put City of London back in the extractive process of the rest of the wealth out of the United States or Europe or whomever. It doesn't matter.
Right. The world, like world markets, essentially.
Evil Corp Central.
here's a data point for people who maybe are listening to all this going, this is nuts. You don't know what you're talking about. And this is something that Alex Craner brought up on your podcast or on your platform,
Sure.
Gold Goats and Guns.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I'm just going to read from my notes so I don't mess anything up here. The Bank of England is ransoming the British people. Just this past summer, they bought $40 billion of government bonds to keep the bond market from collapsing, because the bond market came very close to actually collapsing in the UK. Now, if the Bank of England loses any money off that purchase, the British taxpayers are on the hook to pay back the Bank of England. So this is, and Alex makes a really good analogy here. It's like the slave owner with his slaves. Well, if the slave owner makes a bad, the plantation makes a bad investment and loses some money, the slaves have to pay back the plantation.
Yes.
This is absolutely fucking insane.
Yes.
Like, it's not even just evil. It's like
literally, Grant Morrison was talking about all of this in The Invisibles in the late 1990s. Like, if you haven't read The Invisibles, folks, I'm dead serious. Like, literally winds up talking about the great spiritual awakening of the world. Grant being a big chaos magician, as far as I'm concerned, this is his big spell book.
Alexander Dugan, who's also, I think, a bit of a sorcerer, has been talking about the Great Awakening versus the Great Reset. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to have to do a redux on that series.
Yeah, no, I'm not Dugan's biggest fan, but he is right that this is a great awakening, and you can see that. I've been talking about with people of other people in these same ways, but sincerely and without reservation, the incentives line up. The Fed doesn't have to be our friend, but the Fed works for if you don't understand, okay, the one thing I didn't quite say in all of this, and maybe I should have said at the beginning, because there's so much to say, which is this: who does the Fed actually work for? And if you say the Jews, you lose, sir, you get nothing. He does. The Fed doesn't. That's the wrong answer. It's the wrong frame, and it's a frame that's been told to you by a bunch of fucking British. Sorry. They're part of the story. They're not the whole story. Who the Fed works for are the commercial banks of Wall Street. Period. The most powerful of the 12 regional banks that make up the Federal Reserve is the New York Fed. The shareholders of the New York Fed, all the banks we just named previously, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Bank of New York Mellon, BOFA, all of them. Wells is not. Wells is the San Francisco bank, so it's different. Okay. But that's a different discussion for a different day. The Fed is owned by the commercial banks. They're going to do the bidding always. When anybody says the Fed works for the banks, they don't work for us. I'm like, duh. But did you read the charter? That's what the Fed's supposed to be. The Fed was never supposed to be this powerful. You can thank FDR for that. You can thank a lot of people for that. But that's not the Fed's primary role. Is the Fed screwed up? Yes. Was the initial conception of the Fed as a central bank not a bad idea? Well, yeah, compared to the Bank of England, yeah. But now it's morphed into the Bank of England. Okay? Its original conception was the lender of last resort in a vibrant commercial banking sector that needed the ability to print elastic money to deal with time mismatches because money took time to flow across the country. That's what it was originally designed to do. It was also designed in a federalist way to set up competition amongst the 12 member central banks for regional demand for capital. Meaning that if the demand for money in California is higher than it is in Mississippi, well, then the Atlanta Fed sets its interest rate at, lowers its interest rates to attract capital and stimulate the Southeast economy. Meanwhile, the San Francisco Fed is supposed to be raising interest rates in order to retard the flow of capital into California. So if an extreme example, California is so big because all the MIC money is flowing in from the Marshall Plan and everything else, then California should be paying 6% for dollars. And Mississippi should be paying 3% for dollars. Maybe those funds wouldn't all go to California. When the Fed sets the interest rate at 4.5%, guess what? California wins by 1.5 and Mississippi gets fucked by 1.5. So here's something I heard the other day that will This is called internal mercantilism, and the fucking euro is built around the exact same model to Germany's advantage. Okay? I heard this the other day. Before the Civil War, or right after the Civil War, before the Federal Reserve, Mississippi was one of the richest states in the Union. One of the most vibrant economies in the United States because it made everything. It grew the cotton and the flax and the this and the that and the blah, blah, all of this stuff.
And had the river.
Today, Mississippi is the poorest in the nation, and California is the richest. That was a plan. That was part of the plan. It was always part of the plan in order to build out California into a juggernaut of an economy that then became the regulatory standard by which it could remember, we all grew up with this idea. All the bad ideas start in California and travel east. We've all heard this as long as we've been alive. Why? Because of the money flow, because of the monolithic Fed funds rate, because of fucking LIBOR, because of all of this shit. It was this is not accidental, folks. This is not incompetence. This was a fucking plan. And it was a plan to concentrate capital and political power in one fucking state or two states, New York, Wall Street, California, the MIC, and Silicon Valley, and have them run the country because they were always trying to do away with the Electoral College. So you have the Mercantile Exchange in Chicago, you got Wall Street in New York, you've got California. Together, at one point they controlled over 100. Those three states controlled well over 100 electoral votes. The Democrats had 100 electoral votes in their fucking pocket post Reagan. As a start, these people before the industrial strength cheating, these people had 100 electoral votes. Then they gave DC 3 electoral votes. Fuck these people. They're not even a member of they're not even part of the country. They're a separate administrative district with their own fucking law. Just like the City of London. Just like the fucking Vatican. So you know what they're really scared of right now on Capitol Hill? You know what all those guys in Arlington, Virginia, and Quantico and this and everything that all commute into Washington, D.C. every day? You know what they're scared to death of? Trump's saying, you know what? We can't get rid of the Department of Education tomorrow, but we can put it in Wichita. You don't want to live in Wichita? That's nice. We'll accept your resignation now, please. Or you're fired. Oh, and by the way, when you're working in Wichita, your actions are subject to federal law as opposed to D.C. administrative law. There's an angle on that I haven't even explained. I haven't even thought of yet. I'm putting that in everybody's head to think about the difference between those two things. What happens in City of London stays in City of London. What happens in D.C. stays in D.C.
Stays in D.C. What happens in the Vatican stays in the Vatican.
There's a reason why they set up these friggin' walled gardens for them to operate in extrajudicially.
Let me ask you this question, and I don't know if there's maybe there is a good answer. I know I understand my answer. I think a bit more now.
Okay.
What mystifies me is the rules. They play by these rules because they do create these rules, and theoretically, it's the rules I'm looking at more as rituals, and the ritual and reality are one. So they have it's basically the inroads into occultism, essentially. If you want to get into really schizo stuff,
there is an angle on that, certainly, sure.
Right, because when you create these rules that they basically are forced to play by. It creates this reality, this stable, ordered reality of this is how this works. And everyone goes, and you go along with this is how it works. Now, they just happen to be in a position where they can manipulate the rules whenever and wherever they want. And because they're, untouchable, if they happen to break a rule or break a law or make a thing or or something, whatever, hey, who knows? Oh, let's go blame the Ukrainians. Let's go blame the Jews. Let's go blame this guy. Let's go blame that guy.
Let's go blame Putin for everything. He's got broad shoulders.
Right. Well, right now, the other thing they're going to start blaming, and people don't, I know I got pushback on this, is that Likud, specifically Bibi Netanyahu, is now the new scapegoat. He's being set up to be the scapegoat.
That may be true.
Yeah,
that may be true. I mean, like I hate Netanyahu with the passion of 1,000 purple suns, for Christ's sake, but because he's a sinister man. But at the
absolutely.
same time, of course, why not create an environment where everybody finally, after years of not being able to talk about the quote unquote Jewish question, right? For example, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again: Netanyahu's actions are making the world unsafe for Jews, for real Jews, for peaceful Jews, for most Jews. He is setting up a situation where, because we weren't allowed to talk about them for so long, because if we said anything at all, then we got Jonathan Greenblatt and the ADL and this one and that one coming down on our heads, and and now they just use censorship because they don't want to stop it, but they also allow relief valves to allow you to talk about it every once in a while.
Like
so
Candace
if
Owens.
you guys can't figure out, every one of you who has gone out of their way to say to me, oh, you won't talk about the Jews because Britain, you just use Britain as a way to not talk about the Jews. I'm like, that's not true. It's not. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of British Jews, by the way. The point is that after October 7th, it was okay to start criticizing the Jews overnight. Did anybody not notice this? I did. And the minute I saw that, and that was on October 8th, by the way, I said, well, I ain't talking about this shit anymore, because that's what they want me to do. So they were setting this whole thing up ages ago. So they were setting up the Russia war and the Russian sanctions war and the censorship war in 2019 and 2020, knowing full well that they were going to steal the election in 2020 and then implement everything during Biden's term. So if you don't think that they were setting up all you guys who are out there screaming it's all the Jews today on Twitter, got news for you, folks.
Now that we have gotten everyone totally screwed up, how's your day?
Oh, by the way, John Wayne was a fag, by the way, just to like make the Rico Man thing go all the way down the line, dude. What about our relationship? Fuck that. He gets in the car and flies away. It's like,
we have made Matthew Erickson very, very happy by having this talk, Tom. Somewhere out there where he's watching this and going, because he's gotten 2 goats, 1 cup, finally, to the 2 iconoclastic curmudgeons getting together for a conversation. Tom, thank you so much, man. Pitch out where people can get you. I urge everybody who's been listening to this, if nothing else, and I'm going to reach out to Alex as well. But Alex Craner, the episode is number 190. Sorry, let me just look.
No, number I think it's 190 actually.
190, yeah. Alex Craner, all financial fuses lead to London. You got to listen to it. It's we're doing parallel
Alex
thinking.
We're looking wonderful, and he's one of my very best. I've met Alex in person. We've done a couple of events together and whatnot. If you've not ever experienced the Alex Craner, you're doing it wrong. Like, he's just brilliant, and he's lovely, and he and in a way that is fundamentally different than me, because Alex has seen a lot more heartache than I have, because he watched the breakup of Yugoslavia. He grew up in it, in Croatia, and everything. And so there's a gravitas to Alex's presentation. I think that is incredibly powerful, and he's uncompromising, and he's brilliant on top of everything else. I have a lot of set in stone ideas at this point, but I'm happy to be wrong about any of the stuff that I start to make some leaps on.
I would love to be wrong about everything on this one.
Me too.
Tom, let the people know where they can get you.
You can follow me on my blog over at tomluongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728, where an even worse version of me will show up every day and be a douche. But I do try and at least make the high concept tweets entertaining. And then, of course, you can sign up for the Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, which is where we make our VIG. I do twice weekly market reports, which are both a mix of me ranting into a microphone for about 20 to 30 minutes, along with technical analysis of all the important markets: gold, silver, Bitcoin, the Dow, the Eurodollar markets, all of this stuff. And I do that every Wednesday and every Sunday like clockwork, along with private blogs, sometimes even private podcasts. And then, of course, the Piece de Resistance, which is our monthly newsletter where we do a portfolio analysis, and we also, myself and Dexter White, that's where we write the big articles that we look ahead at where things are going. And I can tell you that I am consistently amazed. When I go back and reread the stuff that we publish, I'm just consistently amazed how good how spot on correct we are. But I think you write stuff in the moment, and you're just like going with the flow, and you get into a flow state, and you do the thing. Like the thing I did today, right? Like we do this, right? And you go back and you're like, who the fuck was that guy? You don't realize sometimes, like, and musicians come in, they go back and they listen to solos they've done, or and it's the same kind of thing. And the thing about it is, and I'm not like busting myself in the back or anything. I'm literally saying to all the new content creators that are out, that are burgeoning, that are thinking about doing this stuff, you will not believe what you're capable of until you actually go out and start doing it, and you'll be like, shit, that was good. And then you can be proud of it, and if you can move the needle and you can help. The whole purpose here is to build a hive mind of great ideas, and through either conversation or polemic or whatever, that gets us to where we need to go. So that's the real goal. And so again, I have a rule. I do everybody's show once, and if I like it, I'll do it twice, and if I don't like it, I'll do it 3 times. So there we go.
Well, we'll shoot for 4. Tom, thank you so much.